Good morning.
Good morning, Babs.
I'm Babs Rawls-Ivy.
And I'm Jeff Grant.
And you're listening to Criminal Justice Insider here on 103.5 WNHH.
And podcasted everywhere.
Yes.
I have this whole list of places for podcasting.
And we are gratefully sponsored by the Community Foundation of Greater New Haven.
Now more than ever.
And we have Lou Reed back with us today.
I'm back.
How are you?
I'm
The famous Louis L. Reed.
Yes.
Yeah, Louis L. Reed. I'm the far much more aliver version of the other guy who's Lou Reed.
but Louis does walk on the wild side.
Yeah, sometimes.
So Louis L. Reed is the national organizer for hashtag Cut 50, an initiative of Van Jones's Dream Corps. And he brings to Cut 50 years of experience in government, criminal justice expertise, policy advocacy, business, and public health. And you hold degrees in criminal justice and psychology and is a board certified addictions counselor and licensed alcohol and addictions practitioner. And you've been on our show before.
That's what rumor has it.
Louis is actually our first guest that has come back for a second visit.
Oh, is it?
Oh, really?
Oh, I didn't realize that.
I feel so privileged.
How are you?
No, you know what that means? That Louis is buying breakfast.
Yeah. We're gonna have to expense that off. I hope they take food stamps.
Don't knock it. A lot of people do these days.
I got the old school kind though, the kind that you rip off,
Oh,
like the paper
man.
kind.
Don't say rip off on this show.
Okay.
So let's shout out Lynn Springer.
Lynn Springer and Andrew Kaplan.
They are our background supporters of us.
And I know you saw on Instagram and Facebook, we had a wonderful, wonderful sleepover with my granddaughter yesterday.
Yay.
Isn't that? I'm telling you, man. For people who have criminal justice issues and think their life is over,
Mm-hmm.
and for after the fact to to have family back in my life and to be, and I talked to Louis about this because he has a little grandson too, and
I do.
I mean, what a gift, and because people when they're going through these things, they think their life is over, and that is not true.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
it's not true.
Not true.
And that's why we do the show, because we want people to understand that there is way more to criminal justice matters and social justice things than people just going to prison.
Mm-hmm.
Like it doesn't end
even,
there.
or even having a conviction. I think that the stereotype is that most people who deal with criminal justice issues are those who have been incarcerated. But the fact of the matter is that you have a vast majority of people who are adjudicated guilty, and they have a set of reentry challenges in and of themselves.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I don't think the population knows that. I don't
Mhm.
think the general public knows that. And so we do this show to sort of bring awareness and highlight these matters that affect and touch just about every segment of the population,
Mhm.
every socioeconomic background, every where you work, all that matters.
And I can tell you that
Yes.
the criminal justice community is far much more informed, and we are far much more better as a result of the voices that you and Jeff bring into this studio. So
Yes.
I'm appreciative of it.
Well,
Yes.
that's going to be our soundbite now for the for the PSA. We're gonna, Harry, you can cut that into a 10-second PSA. That would be fantastic. So, Louis and I are pals. We live kind of close to each other too, so we get together for breakfast, and both worked in Bridgeport at the same time. So we were aligned in a lot of ways. And I feel honored to have Louis as a friend, and to have we doing okay, Harry?
Yeah, just
All
keep
right.
talking.
All right. So Louis, I know you were on the show, but why don't you just kind of give us some background, or our audience some background as to what led you into the criminal justice sector and what informs your work?
Right. So my matriculation into the criminal justice.
I like that matriculation.
My matriculation into the criminal justice profession actually began when I was approximately 5 years old. both of my parents were indicted by the United States federal government and sentenced to. My mother was sentenced to 5 years, and my dad was sentenced to 7 years. And I was raised by my maternal grandmother. And you have to keep in mind that this is probably somewhere to the mid to late 80s. And then when both of my parents are released from custody, here comes crack cocaine. And so not only did I lose my parents at the time, my mother especially at the time, to the criminal justice system, but I also lost her to what, society is now calling a public health epidemic. When drugs were impacting Black, brown, and poor white communities.
It wasn't an epidemic. It was a straight up criminal matter.
Yeah, it was a criminal matter. Now that we have opioids creeping into West Hartford, Greenwich, and Darien, now we all have an issue. Now it's a public health
crisis.
Yeah, it's a public health crisis. So in any event, I think that was my first exposure to the criminal justice system in a vicarious way. And then I got involved in criminal enterprising in the mid to late 90s. I'm not embellishing, but I think that I had a very lucrative criminal career until I was indicted in 2000. And I was indicted in 2000 for bank fraud and also felon in possession of ammunition, two separate cases. And I was sentenced to 188 months in federal prison.
Whoa.
And yeah, that's almost 16 years.
How old were you?
I was going on 23 years old at the time.
Wow.
Yeah, and I had an overrepresentation of my criminal history. I had one felony, and I had several misdemeanor convictions. And you have to consider, right? So when you are, 18, 19 years old, you get involved in the criminal justice system. And if you have misdemeanor offenses for, illegal gambling or, interfering with a police officer, something to that degree.
Yeah.
And if you think that you can cop out and pay a fine or something to that degree, you think that you got off. It's not until you find yourself in, the United States of America versus Louis L. Reed, you find yourself in a federal courtroom that you realize that everything that you pled guilty to along the way to there was actually going to be a collateral consequence against you.
Strikes against you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They're keeping score and you weren't. So I'd served nearly 14 years in federal prison.
Whoa.
Yeah.
I think we knew this, but it still sounds stunning to hear it again.
Louis, where'd you serve?
I was in Raybrook, New York.
Because you're such a young man.
The time. Yeah. Thank you. The whole time I was in Raybrook, New York.
Could you see the bobsled run from your?
It's so interesting. A lot of people don't know the history of in Raybrook. Raybrook was where they had where it was the U.S. Olympic compound for the 1980 Olympics.
It was the Olympic Village.
It was the Olympic Village, and actually the institution that where I was, it was retrofitted after the Olympians had left into a prison.
Yeah.
So it had a very interesting history there.
Wow.
So in any event, while I was there were three things that happened with me. Number one, I unapologetically converted my life to Christ. I'm unapologetic a Christian, and my faith has kept me buoyant during times where life would have, quite frankly, drowned me in despair. The second thing is that an education vista and passport opened up in my life, where I was able to realize that the key to not just economic opportunity, but the key to advocacy was for me through education, being informed, understanding what the system is, so on and so forth. And the third thing is that I realized, like one of my closest mentors often says, those who are closest to the problem are closest to the solution, but often furthest from resources and power. And that's Glenn E. Martin.
Glenn was here last December.
Glenn was here. Glenn was here. Glenn was here. He had a very insightful show, and I'm glad that he was here. Glenn is a very necessary voice in the criminal justice community. So, after I was released from incarceration, I was released back here to the state of Connecticut. I, held several different jobs as case managers, counselors, so on and so forth. And no matter what it is that I did, that righteous indignation would not extinguish as it relates to criminal justice. So it just so happened that a guy by the name of Mayor Joseph P. Ganim happened to be running for re-election in the city of Bridgeport.
Who was also a guest here?
He was also a guest here.
Yep.
He happened to be running for a re-election in the city of Bridgeport. At that time, I was looking at the city of Bridgeport from the perspective as to how my needs were served when I was home, how adequate my needs were served when I was home.
Yeah.
I didn't think that my needs were served as adequate as I thought they could have been.
Mhm.
And based off of the testimonies of the scores of other people who I knew, many people, felt as though that you had a lot of criminal justice organizations that were out there in theory, but not necessarily in practice. So I introduced a program. I did a qualitative and quantitative analysis of the reentry needs in the city of Bridgeport. It wasn't as scientific as I'm making it out to be.
More art than science.
Yeah, exactly.
That sound like grant language.
Yeah. So what I did was I introduced those findings to the city of Bridgeport, and a woman who I think is absolutely phenomenal. Her name is Kimberly Staley, who is the former chief administrative officer to the city of Bridgeport. That facilitated also by city councilwoman Anita Martinez and state representative Charlie Starworth, who at the time was the mayor's senior advisor. He's
running for mayor now.
He is running for mayor. Yeah. Don't ask me who I am endorsing.
So is Marilyn.
Marilyn Moore.
I'm
too.
hosting a fundraiser for her.
Are you?
On the 19th here in New Haven.
Marilyn Moore. She's very sincere, as is Dr. Starworth as well. So I introduced that concept to the city of Bridgeport. They accepted it, and I was appointed as the first reentry director for the city of Bridgeport. I was in that position for approximately 18 months. We had phenomenal success. We won a national award for best reentry practices by the U.S. Conference of Mayors.
And that was Myra.
That was Myra. That was the mayor's initiative for reentry affairs.
And full disclosure, Lewis tapped me on the shoulder and asked me to become
the chair,
the first co-chair, along with Brent Peterkin.
Yes,
who was also a guest here.
Oh, look, hey, we got the whole crew here. So I was in that position for approximately 18 months. The program was successful. We replicated the program in several cities across the nation. The city of Detroit, Kansas City, Missouri, just to name a few. Until I slid on a banana pill. I exercised an aberration of judgment and a deference of character, and I was rearrested for, in part, child support arrears that accrued while I was incarcerated. And so when that happened with me, I slid into a clinical depression. And there were not many people within the criminal justice community who were supportive of me. I can tell you, literally, when I was arrested, probably 10 minutes after I made bail, Jeff Grant was one of the first people who had reached out to me and said, "What is it that you need? How can I support you? How can then family reentry with all of its resources? How can we get behind you, and how can we stand with you?"
Oh yeah, we offered you a job. We wanted everyone to know that we were standing up for you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And one of the things that my grandmother taught me, my grandmother passed away April 2nd of last year. In all of her conventional wisdom, she taught me, not everybody who is with you is necessarily for you. And not everybody who's for you is necessarily with you. And, Babs, I can tell you that was probably the darkest moment of my life. I mean, like, I had been incarcerated for nearly 14 years. I had lost my great uncle, who was a surrogate father to me, in 2011. I had lost my nephew. Tragically, he was shot 6 times in 2012. That sank me into a despair. But nothing, absolutely nothing made me as melancholy as that did. And I'm going to highlight several reasons why that made me melancholy. Number one, the entire criminal justice community seemed to at me, and it was hurtful. And it wasn't the criminal justice community at large, in New York and other jurisdictions where I had help. Surprisingly, those were the people, when they had heard about it, and because I brought it to their attention. And you have to realize that oftentimes when you are in a situation, you feel as though that you're in an echo chamber. You feel as though that everyone is looking at you, right? And everyone knows about it.
No, everybody was looking at you.
Yeah, well, everybody in the state of Connecticut was looking at me.
Yeah.
However, outside of here, when
nobody else was looking at
me. When I reached out to New York, they like, what? Like, what are you talking about? Like, do you want a job up here or not? Right? Like, so, but people here in the state of Connecticut, by where I was tethered to, right, and where I'm endeared to. It felt as though that everyone was like, and it hurt me so bad
Mhm.
because I'm saying to myself, this is the community who is supposed to be not about second chance, but about equity, right?
Mm.
And we know that reentry is not a linear process. My grandmother used to say you can have more degrees than a thermometer and you can be absolutely as dumb as a rock. So
I'm proof.
yeah, exactly. you and me both. So we understand that reentry is not a linear process, right? Reentry is not a case of a static a case of circumstances that if people meet these check marks, then everything is going to be rainbows and unicorns in a world.
It actually never works out that way.
It never works
No.
out that way. And if you try to prescribe it as such,
Mhm.
that's when you are going to have the greatest failures.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I didn't
Yeah.
realize that,
Yeah.
by practice until it happened to me. The second reason why I think that it hurt me was because many of the people, and it's interesting. I'm going to just defer from that for a second, and I'm going to tell you something relatively recent, something that recently happened. So my predecessor at the city of Bridgeport, my successor at the city of Bridgeport, I should say, Eric Christmas. I believe that he, had very good intentions, and he was recently let go from
Yeah, he's a beautiful guy.
He-
He was at
Recovery Network. of
Recovery
programs.
Network. Yeah.
Yes, yes. And I think that he had tried to do the best, by which he could with what he had.
Mm-hmm.
And his resources were very thin, so on and so forth. And so an unnamed city council person called me relatively recently. And I hadn't heard from this person since, I don't know when. This person had requested me on Facebook, and, they see me in pictures with Jay-Z now. They see me tethered with Van Jones and, on an episode of the Kim Kardashian, so on and so forth, or Keeping Up with the Kardashians, etc.
Yeah, we do have to get to Kim Kardashian at some point in this conversation.
We'll get into that. So the individual called me, and he says, "Hey, Lewis, hey, what's going on?" And I'm like, "Hey, what's going on?" And he was like, "Hey, rumor has it that the President Obama may be coming to Connecticut, so on and so forth, and that you may be facilitating that." And I said, "Well, you can't always listen to rumors." So we had some type of laugh or whatever. And he said, "Hey," he said, "Did you hear that your successor was let go?" And I said, "Now I'm hearing it." And he said, "Yeah, man, I didn't think that was gonna work out for him, so on and so forth." And I said, "Hold up, let's stop right here."
Yeah.
And I said, I have an issue with this conversation for one of several reasons. I said, number one, as a black man,
Mm-hmm.
I am never going to revel in another person of color not being gainfully employed.
Mhm.
That's number one. Number two, I said, when I got caught up in my situation where the Connecticut Post dragged me through the mud,
Yeah.
I said, you were one of the people who laughed at me. He said, "Hey, what are you talking about? I never laughed at you." I screenshot.
Oh,
As
that's
I'm talking to him.
That's ugly, man.
As I'm talking to him, I
Oh.
went back to his timeline.
Yeah.
I screenshot the article.
Yeah.
I screenshot the laughing emoji that he had made, when he shared the article
That's terrible.
on his Facebook. And I said, "I want you to check your phone." And as he was checking his phone, all of a sudden, he had an important phone call that came in, and he had to call me back, and I've yet to hear from him. So, back to the above. I realized that the people by whom I thought I was fighting for in the community, you are only as good to people as your last favor. And I thought that it was more about me where, when I was in that position, and I come to realize that it wasn't necessarily about me, but what I had access to and who I had access to.
But Lewis, I mean, we've talked about this a lot.
Yes.
So you knew pretty soon that you had to get a dose of
Reality.
humility and
Yes.
God in your life back then, in that you had separated yourself from the values that
I
you
had,
were standing.
and I'm glad that you brought that up. Babs, and full disclosure, I had, oftentimes when you find yourself with where you feel is the apex of your career, you kind of stretch yourself stuff a little bit. And there were people along the way in when I introduced the program to the city of Bridgeport who literally told me that it never happened. You haven't been home long enough.
Yeah.
There are more other people in line, so on and so forth. And I cataloged that. And all of those people who told me no, I flaunted our successes. I flaunted all of our yeses in their face without compunction.
Yeah.
And not only that, but shamefully speaking, I had at the time, I had stepped out of my marriage. And I got involved in, a very, irresponsible relationship with someone. You know, I won't necessarily name who that individual was.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, I absolutely. For all parties involved, other than myself. But I just say that to humanize myself,
Mhm.
right? And I say that to say that irrespective to, you know, what type of past that you have, what position that you may hold, so on and so forth, none of us is impervious to sin. None of us is impervious to believe in our own press, and none of us are impervious to, you know, becoming our own hazards. If we don't necessarily walk in a spirit of humility, if we don't walk in a spirit of love, and if we don't have a Jeff Grant on our shoulder, saying, "Hey,
To keep it real.
yeah, to keeping it
but,
real."
But this is one of the reasons why we talk about all the time that if you're in isolation, you know, you're dead before you start.
Absolutely.
You got to live in community.
Absolutely.
And
You have to live in the right community.
Yeah, in the right community.
You know,
that's right.
You have to live in the right community.
That's
And
right.
I believe that, you know, there's a Proverb 27:6 that says, "Faithful are the wounds of a friend, but the kisses of an enemy are deceitful."
Mm.
And essentially what that means is that when I'm your friend, I'm going to tell you things that very well may not feel good, but it's going to be for you. And when I don't necessarily mean you any well, you know, I'll go along to get along, so to speak.
Yeah.
And Jeff is one of those people where he fits in the former category, not the latter.
Oh, I know.
Brutal, man. Brutal.
Oh, I know.
Brutal. All right. So bring us up to date now, because Lewis, you've done so many things since then.
Mhm.
It's hard to keep track.
So many things since you were last here.
Yeah.
And I must say, there's a whole different vibe to you now than when you were here the last time.
And I appreciate that. I think that what you see is one of several things. I think that you see balance. I'm far much more balanced. You know, even though my schedule is as far much more hectic than you can quite imagine, I'm balanced. You know, I'm anchored more so in the Lord. I'm back, you know, to my first love. I'm focusing more intentionally and more deliberately on family. I have people who are close to me, who can really advise me, and, you know, whose advice I actually take to heart. And so what do we have going on? Obviously, you know, believe the last time we were here, I was talking about the National Day of Empathy. Shameless branding.
Oh, yeah, open it all the way up.
Shameless branding. I was here talking about the National Day of Empathy, where Cut 50, you know, as mentioned, it's a bipartisan criminal justice initiative co-founded by CNN political commentator Van Jones and now Reform Alliance CEO. I believe that, you know, some of you guys may know the co-founders of the Reform Alliance, some guy by the name of Jay-Z, another guy by the name of Meek Mill, another guy by the name of Robert Kraft, another guy by the name of Mike Rubin, who owns the Philadelphia 76ers. You may have heard of him.
Yeah, we know something about these people.
So
super cool guys.
Yeah, I that's what rumor has it.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
But in any event, co-founded by Van Jones and the intellectual brain trust of Jessica Jackson, who is our co-founder and our also national director. At Cut 50, we you know, we are a policy shop. We focus on legislation nationwide. I believe our crowning achievement has been the First Step Act, and I'm going to give you guys an exclusive before we close our conversation today. But, you know, our crowning achievement was the First Step Act. The First Step Act was the federal legislation that was passed in December that President Trump signed into law that prohibited the shackling of pregnant women while they're incarcerated, unlocked education access to approximately 16,000 people who are currently waitlisted, recalibrated the crack cocaine disparity, where individuals who were sentenced to crack cocaine were ineligible to be resentenced retroactively. The First Step Act allowed the prescription for such. In addition to 924C stacking, that's the firearm stacking, where law enforcement will use a lot of weasel stuff in order to give someone an enhanced sentence, so on and so forth. So we're ecstatic about that. We are now in the implementation phase. Back to our National Day of Empathy, we have over 300 organizations nationwide.
And what date is that?
That is the first Tuesday in March.
Okay.
I just want to point out something about the First Step Act, because one of the probably unintended, well, maybe intended results of it is that judges around the country are using that First Step Act as a basis for being more lenient.
Yeah,
You know, and for having more.
it gives them permission to
exactly,
have empathy.
exactly.
Yeah.
It gives them permission to have empathy.
Yeah.
And you know, in full transparency, you know, I have cousins. I have a cousin. I have actually 4 cousins who were recently indicted. One of my cousins, you know, got busted with $300,000 in cash, 5 kilos of cocaine, etc. And in their pretrial negotiations, what's coming up for them is the First Step Act.
Yep.
Some provisions of the First Step Act. So, you know, again, Jeff, you know, it's given judges the permission and the prescription to have a level of empathy for the defendants by which they have to potentially sentence.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah, so our National Day of Empathy, well, I should say our Empathy Network, on our National Day of Empathy, it was a phenomenal success. We had over 104 million social media impressions. We had the social influencer support of Kim Kardashian, Bishop T.D. Jakes, Reverend Al Sharpton, I mean, like scores of A-list actors.
Hundreds, really.
Yeah, really. People who came out and just really, you know, wanted to increase the IQ of our community at large about what it's like to have empathy, not just for people who are impacted by the criminal justice system who have criminal convictions, but for survivors of violence, i.e. the Redemption Project that airs on CNN every Sunday night at 9:00 that Van Jones facilitates, where they talk about restorative justice, and also individuals who are in recovery from substance abuse. We look at that. We look at all categories as being within the framework of what criminal justice, our criminal justice community looks like. It's representative of our criminal justice community. So we organize 60 events in 40 states. We are comprised of a national coalition of over 300 organizations and 3,000 members at large. That network, I should say, is something by which I manage directly.
When you say 3,000 members, you mean 3,000 organizations?
No. Well, so our Empathy Network is 300 organizations, and we have 300. We have 3,000 people who subscribe.
I got it.
To our Empathy Network. So these are people who very well may be, you know, supporters, people who press a like on a post or retweet, so on and so forth. So we're proud about our Empathy Network, and it's growing daily. We are going to be organizing in all 50 states probably by the close of this month, which we are ecstatic about. And yeah, I think that, you know, the First Step Act, the reason why it was successful was because that was a campaign that was led by individuals who had been impacted by the criminal justice system, and it was supported by our Empathy Network, and it was backed by, you know, the influencers who were aforementioned.
Okay. So what are the goals? Like, because you've accomplished this now, so you could check that off the box. What's next?
Well, I don't think that it's something that we ever check off the box. And even if other people do check that off the box, in my mind, I don't.
Okay.
I think that our criminal justice community at large, there's so much work to be done. Even, you know, collateral consequence reform. You know, when you look at, again, people, I think that there are criminal convictions that should be prosecuted. And I think that there are criminal convictions that should be interrogated post-conviction, right? And that's a conversation for another time. But for the most part, I don't think that we should have a one-size-fit-all prescription to those individuals who have criminal convictions when it comes to employment, when it comes to housing, when it comes to licensure, when it comes to X, Y, and Z. I think that we should be looking at things from a moral turpitude perspective and looking at people on an individual basis. So in my mind, you know, I never have a box that is fully checked because I know that there are always something that is in the next. What's in the next for us for Cut 50 as an organization? Obviously, there's the implementation for the First Step Act. There's going to be a major announcement next Thursday.
Is this our?
I teased it a little bit.
What did you call it? You called it a exclusive.
Yeah, an exclusive.
This is our exclusive.
Yeah, so there's going to be a major announcement from the White House next Tuesday. And I just want to pause for a second, if you don't mind, Babs, and let me know
Yes, go right
how
ahead.
I'm doing on time. Just tell me to
You're
shut
good.
up.
No,
Just
you're
come
good.
over here, just slap the microphone. From
No,
in front of me
we are
if I go on a tangent.
anti-violence.
Okay.
as I'm tweeting exclusive.
Yeah. so let me say this. There are a lot of people who had an issue with the First Step Act because it was tethered to the Trump administration. And I'm the first to say that I got 99 problems with 45, but the First Step Act is not one of them. And we have to realize that when people are incarcerated, when people are hurting, you don't care if whether or not Trump, if it's Obama, if it's a dancing bear who signs your proclamation, emancipation proclamation, so to speak.
Yeah.
So long as you are out, families don't care who it is who signs the pen, who it is who signs, the article of release.
Yeah.
So long as their loved one is back at home for family milestones, for graduations, for Thanksgiving, so on and so forth. And I think that much of the consternation around the First Step Act was not necessarily the act in and of itself, but it was the individual by whom the bill was tethered to, and that was the Trump administration. And I say this all the time. My grandmother used to tell me, when you disagree on 99 issues with an individual, you have the responsibility to stand up and speak loud about it. However, if you find one issue by which there is alignment on, you have responsibility to stand up and speak loud about it. And I am one of those individuals where I don't, yes, I have issues with this administration around immigration. I have issues with this administration around domestic and foreign policy, so on and so forth. But the one issue where this administration could be just as bad on as it relates to criminal justice reform, they're not. And we need to be fully supportive of it as a criminal justice community. We need to call them out when they are not necessarily doing the things by which they could do. But on this issue, Cut 50, myself, and the many of the people within the criminal justice community at large who support the First Step Act, and the families of those individuals who are impacted by this piece of legislation, we stand behind this administration on this issue.
Well, you don't have, obviously you don't have to be best friends with the people you do business with, otherwise there'd never be peace talks.
It's interesting, Jeff, because I was on a radio show, and they said, "Well, I don't understand it, Lewis. Like, how can you go into the White House? How can you have a conversation with Jared Kushner? How could you do all of these things when you know they're so bad?" And I said, okay, I want to deconstruct something for a second. I'm not old enough to remember the 60s. I wasn't even born in the 60s. I said, but I'm an ardent student of the Civil Rights era. I said, let's go back to 1964, the Civil Rights Act. MLK went into the White House with an open bigot, at best, in the presidency of LBJ.
That's true.
LBJ used the N-word, probably more than he used, any other word while he was in the White House.
Yep.
That did not preclude MLK and all of the other civil rights activists at that time from negotiating with that administration in order to pass the 1964 Civil Rights Bill. We look at this First Step Act as the 1959 Civil Rights Bill, which was a precursor to the larger one. And that's not, if it was good enough for MLK, who is lauded as probably, the most one of the most profound voices of the 20th century, and in all of our nation's history, then it's going to be good enough for Louis L. Reed, for Van Jones, for Jessica Jackson, for Topeka K. Sam, for Sarita Stive Martin, and the many other people out there who have supported the First Step Act.
Well, if you're gonna spend your life speaking truth to power, then you got to recognize who's got the power in order to speak truth to it.
And you also have to recognize that the people in power are never greater than the power of people.
There you go.
Okay.
There you go. There's our second soundbite for the
I'm gonna have to copyright this stuff, man. Before I come on next time.
Louis, we know you have your people working on it already.
So here's the exclusive. Next week there's going to be a major announcement at the White House. That is going to include probably the likeness of major Fortune 100 CEOs, some major artists, athletes, and actors who are going to be coming out regarding the First Step Act. I can't give you all the details, but I can tell you that you want to stay tuned to your television sets next week, next Thursday. I believe the press presser is going to be at approximately 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. At that time, I think that it's going to be announced that there are going to be
Go for it, Louis. Go for it. We want the exclusive part.
I don't want Jessica Van calling my phone like immediately as soon as I say this. Like, why did you say that? Blah, blah, blah.
No, go ahead. Go for it.
But I think that there's going to be an announcement as relates to the implementation for the First Step Act. The individuals who are scheduled to be released, how many individuals are going to be scheduled to be released, and what we are going to be doing as a national community. Also, from a government point of view, the private sector, the reentry community, so on and so forth, what we are going to be doing to better support those individuals who are going to be coming home.
And do you have a sense of numbers? What does that look like? And I do hope that is not exploitive.
Yeah, so those numbers, they're very preliminary. I do know that the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, they said that it could be as little as 2,000 who could be immediately impacted, or as much as 5,000.
That's a big number.
That is. I mean, one is a larger number. Is a large number for me. So long as you have one person who is not incarcerated. I'm pleased. But if we can get people back to their families, and if we can do that in droves, and if we can do it appropriately, and if we can do it responsibly, that's what we're committed to doing.
Okay. Just to show you the size and scope of the way this at least works in my world and your world too.
Absolutely.
So you could be at the White House, or you could be with Jay-Z and Kim Kardashian West and making these announcements. But next Thursday, I'm going to be in Fishkill Correctional Institution watching inmates put on Macbeth. So, I mean, I get the chills right now. Thinking that, I mean, talk about bringing it right down where they're doing Shakespeare in prison. And Lynn and I and some of our friends are going to be there.
That's awesome.
While
that makes my heart dance.
Isn't
that makes my heart dance.
Isn't that wild?
That really makes my heart dance.
My concern in all of this is, so will there be some sort of supportive assistance wrapped around these folks? Because if they're coming back into communities that are not prepared for reentry, what happens? Because I don't think we can. I'm appreciative of people coming out. What are they coming out to?
I think that is what you have to stay tuned for.
Okay.
I think that's what you have to stay tuned for. But I absolutely agree with you. I think that we as a community, it's not one organization's responsibility. It's not one individual's responsibility. It's not one government's responsibility. We as a nation got ourselves into this mess, and it's going to take we as a nation and as a community to get ourselves out of this mess. And when we're talking about resources, my first love is reentry. First, we have to greet people with love. We have to greet people with empathy, and we have to greet people with understanding. Outside of that, we have to have appropriate resources for housing. We have to have appropriate resources for employment. We have to have appropriate resources for mental health and substance abuse.
Wellness is big.
Wellness is huge.
Prison is the largest mental health provider in this country.
Well, in theory, but not necessarily in practice.
No, not in practice. But
certainly housing people with mental illness issues, but whether or not they're getting treated is another story.
No, I'm certain that they're not. But But that has to be addressed as well.
I think that definitely has to be addressed, and we have to not only hold our legislature accountable and responsible to that issue, but we also have to hold ourselves responsible as well. We can't pass the buck. We can't say that it's their problem. This is our problem. This is our issue. And if this is our issue, that means that, again, back to the notion of Glenn Martin, those who are closest to the problem are closest to the solution. We have the solution. We have the solution in ourselves. We have the solution, at our dinner tables. We have the solution within our spirits, and we just need access to resource, power, privilege, opportunity in order to be able to bridge that chasm.
I agree with you. I think that's a powerful sort of statement.
We both cut our teeth here in Connecticut, and Connecticut is an enlightened pardon state. I mean, we have a paroles and pardons board, and people can actually get a pardon in Connecticut. It's possible. I mean, in fact, a lot of people apply do, but you can't do it alone. I mean, you can't get a pardon unless you have a job, unless you're in a faith community, unless you're paying your child support, unless you're and it takes an entire community to get one person a pardon.
Yeah, and you know, while as progressive as Connecticut has been, there's still more work to be done.
Oh yeah.
And I'm definitely not satisfied. You know, to the pardon the pardon process, you need, you know, a JD, you know, in order to just to be able to review the pardon application, right? This shameless plug to Jeff Grant. If you guys are out there and you know how to, you want to apply for a pardon, you can reach out to Jeff. But
C Card does a better job than I do. That's
right,
for sure.
and that came through experience, and I think that, you know, our pardon process should be streamlined in the state of Connecticut. I don't think that it should be as bureaucratic as it is. It has gotten better, but I think that it can get far much. It can be improved far much more. And I think that there's still more work to be done here in the state of Connecticut, even with the Clean Slate Act. You know, the dissenting opinions that I've heard from on the other side of the aisle as to why that should not be enacted was just absolutely asinine. And again, just like I drew the illustration earlier regarding substance abuse. It's not until your family becomes impacted by an issue that it's going to be, oh, we need a clean slate act legislation. And so I think that Connecticut has come a long way, but I think that we still have a longer way to go in that regard.
So Louis, Babs, how much more time we have?
We have time. You got about 5 minutes.
So tell us what's tell us what's on your personal trajectory now, because like you're traveling in some big company now, and
keeping up with the Kardashians.
Keeping up. Yeah. First of all, how did you get on Keeping Up with the Kardashians?
Well, that was that announcement. We were at an event in LA. It was the LA Variety event. Myself, Van Jones, our Dignity Director, Topeka K. Sam, Miss Alice Marie Johnson, so on and so forth. We were there. Kim Kardashian West happened to be there, speaking in regards to the release of Miss Alice Marie Johnson, so on and so forth. Incidentally, it just so happened to be on the day that the president was announcing his support of the First Step Act.
And Kim Kardashian had gone to the White House to advocate on behalf of her.
Advocate on behalf of Miss Alice Marie Johnson.
Right.
So the stars would align that as we are walking into the venue so that Van and Kim can go on stage, you know, to speak about Miss Alice Marie Johnson, criminal justice reform, so on and so forth. I'm like, hey, he's going live, and that's where you kind of like see me in the episode, like Trump. So we gather around the phone, and we're actually listening to me, Alex Gudich, our deputy director, Miss Alice Marie Johnson, Kim Kardashian, West, and Van Jones. We're gathered around the phone listening to the president make the announcement.
So that's your 15 seconds of fame. That's it.
I think that was more probably like 7.5 seconds. I wouldn't even you know categorize it as 15 seconds.
Okay. Well.
But I've been infamous for other things.
Oh yeah, I know. Yeah. What's that called when you jump in the back of someone's photo?
Photo bombing.
Louis is a big photo bomber. So tell us what's up with you now. I mean, because you got a lot of stuff going on. I mean, and I know you're traveling all over the country, and so like, what's your passion now? What's happening with Louis Reed? You know, and what are you going to be doing over the next year, 2 years? What do you see?
Yeah, so you know, obviously I'm tethered to Cut 50, you know, unapologetically, and you know, I have an unrelenting commitment and passion to the organization. Personally and privately, you know, I've written a book, and I've written a book that I got Author of the Year in 2016 as a result of my book. It's called 9 Steps to Fall Up When You Trip Down. I'm in the process of writing another book now. I am doing criminal justice strategic consultations for political campaigns.
Are you doing personal empowerment work still?
I am. I'm still doing personal empowerment coaching. I'm doing executive coaching, etc. If you want to know more about that, you can go to louislreed.org and you can see more information on that. I'm, still doing my, inspirational and inspirational and empowerment clinics to Fortune 100 companies, etc.
You've been speaking around the country.
I have been speaking. I have been speaking. I actually just spoke at Harvard. I did a clinic at UMass Medical School. I am in negotiations right now with Boston College to kind of like be their resident, criminal justice facilitator or something or another, some type of title that they haven't kind of like finalized yet.
You see, when you're a talk show host, you ask questions you already know the answer to, so you can facilitate the conversation.
Yeah. So yeah, those are the things that are in my passion, and whenever I can, I still practice clinically. I'm still doing substance abuse counseling.
Are you?
Yeah. I'm doing that virtually. So I think that technology has made that very easy for me. I have a handful of clients.
The last time we had breakfast, you got a call from someone in prison who called through on your phone, and I said, Louis, how many people are calling you from prison? And you told me you have over 200 people calling.
It's now over 300
from prison.
From prison. I communicate with more than 300 people who are incarcerated, whether that's via Core Links, that's the federal prison portal for emails, etc., and or people who are calling me directly.
Yeah,
over 300.
Wow. Do you sleep?
Yes, upside down.
Like a bat.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
All right, so tell everyone how to contact you and
sure,
and the various websites and everything else.
Sure. So if you want more information about consulting, coaching, etc., you can go to lewislreed.org. That's lewislreed.org. If you want to know more information about what we are doing at Cut 50 as it relates to our National Day of Empathy and or what we are calling our Empathy 365 campaign, where we're not just highlighting one day, but we're going to be active year round, you can go to dayofempathy.org and or you can go to cut50.org. That's cut50.org. And if you want to stay connected with me on social media, I am on all social media platforms at
see you
at Louis L. Reed. So you can follow me on Twitter at Louis L. Reed. You can follow me on Instagram.
I see you.
You can follow me on Instagram at Louis L. Reed, and or I got a cooler name that I like to say. My @ name is at He Inspires the number 4 Real.
Oh yeah, He Inspires for real. I'm always hitting you up on that.
Yeah, you always hit me up, Jack. I'm guaranteed to get at least like 7 notifications from Jeff throughout the week. So I'm at He Inspires for real on Instagram.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for
it's been
coming
a joy.
back.
It's been a joy.
It's a pleasure to see you.
I love being here. I love the work that you and Jeff are doing. You guys, continue to be the light of our community. Continue to inject love into the hearts and minds of people, and we need this platform. So I'm grateful. Van sends his love.
I saw him at he was the Vassar keynote.
Oh, was he?
Speaker.
Oh, was he?
Yes, our friend Andrew Kaplan's daughter graduated from Vassar.
Awesome.
So they live streamed it. So he was the keynote.
Awesome.
I got to hit up Andrew and tell him that.
No. He knows.
Yeah, I got a beautiful.
He was there.
I got a beautiful photo of Louis and Van and me, but also with Fred Hodges.
Yeah.
So I'm glad Fred, was around for that.
Yeah, Fred is a good mentor of mine, and Jessica Jackson, who is our national director and our co-founder, she sends her love to in the entire
and say
Cut 50
hi to
team.
Topeka Sam.
I will say hi to
That's my
Topeka
girl.
Sam.
We have Khalil Cumberbatch coming in.
You got Khalil coming?
He's our first guest September when we come back from summer hiatus.
So Khalil and I are just leadership fellows. Khalil,
We know.
Yeah. Khalil, that's my
and Topeka was on my show early on, like
really?
before I did this. Before I was doing this, I do the morning show. So she was a guest. She came on and
I was just texting
and
Topeka
this is
right before I went on the air.
She jumped to Sirius.
And,
so.
and Marcus Bullock is in 2 weeks. He's a JLUSA guy.
I think he's in a current fellowship. And
So.
Marcus Bullock is being funded by Baron Davis from the Golden State Warriors, who was a good guy.
Good.
So yeah. Oh, so you know the entire family.
Yeah, so we are
connected.
all connected.
We're all connected.
We're like
Thank
a
you.
breeding ground from
Just leadership.
Just leadership people.
Thank you so much for
Thank
your
you.
time.
This has been a pleasure.
And peace and blessings to you.
Yeah.
Grace and peace to you as well.
Thank you, Lynn Springer.
And Andrew Kaplan and Community.
Thank you, Community Foundation for Greater New Haven.
Now more than ever.
And we will be back in another.
We will be back on what's today's date?
Today's the 10th.
10th. Today's the 10th.
Yeah.
No, no.
The 7th.
It's the
I'm sorry.
7th. No, so we'll be back on the 21st.
And that'll be our
Mar-
last show, right? For the
last show
summer?
of his summer, and that's Marcus Bullock, and he'll be. I think he's calling in.
Okay. Well, thank y'all. Thank you, Harry.
Thank you, Harry.
And
Thank
we're
you,
on our way out.
Lewis, man, the best.